Hello, my name is SEYEDSADEGH YOUSEFZADEH. I have participated in making of some indie video games, and I want to talk about a book which I think is good for people who are interested in game development and games. The name of the book is Theory of Fun for Game Design, and it's written by Ralph Custer. Ralph Custer was born in 1971, and he has a bachelor's degree of writing. He had key role in development of Legend Mod, Ultima Online, and he was a director and senior designer in Star Wars Galaxies. He writes articles about games, he has interviews about games, and one of his latest interview is about metaverse, and that's with Venture Beats. I think he's one of the important people in video games industry. And this is summarized information about him, and you can visit his website for more information. Now let's talk about the book, and I want to begin with a prologue. Before talking about prologue, I want to mention that this book has 12 main chapters, and this video is an overview of this book. The title of prologue is My Grandfather. In prologue, Ralph Custer talks about his grandfather and games and etc. His grandfather questioned him about whether is he proud of his job or not, and his answer was this: yes, this is something worthwhile. I connect people and I teach people. But at that time, Ralph Custer hadn't enough proof for this. I think this can be enough for main points of prologue part of this book, and I want to talk about first chapter of book. The title of first chapter is Why Write This Book. Ralph Custer talks about children plays and their high speed at learning new things, like learning a new language. He also talks about the games that are getting harder for him because they need high speed of reaction time, while he is better in the games that they are puzzle based. He also somehow compares video games to working. He thinks that video games and working aren't much different. There are other important things in the first chapter, but I think that this can be enough for main points or main important points of first chapter. Now I want to talk about chapter 2, how the brain works. In this chapter there are some definitions for games. There is one definition that I like more compared to others. And that definition is from Rules of Play. And according to this definition, a game is a system which players are engaged in a virtual competition that are defined by special rules and has countable results or consequences. I think this definition is one of the best. Ralph Custer also talks about human mind. He thinks that human mind is powerful at finding patterns. For example, we can find a face in tree woods or clouds or other things. He also mentions that human brain or human mind doesn't like noise because it can't understand that. He also somehow mentions that even a noise has pattern, but we can't understand that pattern, and that is why it is difficult for our mind or brain. And also maybe that is the reason that why we don't like noise. I think this can be enough for second chapter, and I want to move to the next chapter. Chapter 3. Title of this chapter is What Games Are. There are many different definitions for game, but most of them believe that choose, rule, challenge, or conflict are important aspects of a game. Roughcaster thinks that maybe it seems games are apart from reality, but in his opinion, games are real. As I understood, Custer thinks that the game's rules and the real world rules are processed same in our brain. So maybe this is the reason of his opinion. Custer thinks that games are powerful tools for teaching. For example, explaining the map isn't the territory with a game is much different compared to read that from a book. He also talks about patterns in games. Patterns are important in games. I think we can define a game as understanding, learning, and analyzing patterns. I think this can be enough for chapter 3, and I want to move to the next chapter. Chapter 4, and the title of this chapter is What Games Teach Us. Games can teach us new things, and they also can help us to improve our skills. I want to mention some of them. For example, games can teach us how to test and analyze our surrounding environments. Some games teach us adventuring, exploring, and discovering. Also, some of them teach us precise aiming for shooting, and even some of them teach us teamwork. And there are also other things. One of the other important things in this chapter is about roots of games. Roots of lots of games, especially games that are transformed to Olympic games, are related to basic human needs, but in new or modern games is tried to have games that are more compatible with modern life. Nevertheless, when we look into the depth of it, we will see that generally games don't teach us more than few or a few subjects. Okay, although I think what Roughcaster has written can be true, but I do think that there are exceptions. Moreover, I think I should note that the first version of this book was written many years ago, and he is speaking generally. I say this because he has noted that game can modeling complex and complicated and deep situations. I think this can be enough for most of important things of chapter 4. Basically, I have spoken about 4 main chapters plus the prologue of this book, And as I said, this book has 12 main chapters. I think this can be good for having an overview of the book, but I will shortly tell you what are other main or important chapters. Chapter 5. What games aren't? One of the important things in this chapter is about stories in video games. Ralph Custer talks about importance of a story and its place in video games. He also expressed his opinion about stories in video games, which he believes that most of designers choose a moderate or usual story for games. Ralph Custer is also a writer. He wrote the first version of this book many years ago. I thought this can be better to I mention this. Chapter 6. Different fun for different folks. It talks about talents and different favorite professions and games. Also topics or subjects that are similar to them. This chapter somehow mentions that there are different games for different tastes. Chapter 7. The title of this chapter is The Problem with Learning. It is about different problems of learning and problem solving and more things. One of the important things that I like to mention is that Ralph Custer somehow mentions that human brain is always looking to find a shortcut way. And I think this is important, one of the important notes of this chapter. Chapter 8. The Problem with People. One of the important things that I saw in this chapter is this. People tend to come to a given puzzle and try to apply known solutions. So maybe somehow Ralph Custer wants to mention that some people like to solve a puzzle with a solution that they already knew. Chapter 9. Games in Context. One of the key points in this chapter is about a table for gaming in the human activity matrix. This table has 3 columns for activities. There are also 3 important lines which express user goal. You can take a look at one of the tables in the video. Chapter 10. The Ethics of Entertainment. This chapter is mainly about moralities in games. Designing games isn't just about mechanics. This was one of the important notes that I saw in this chapter. Another thing that I like to share is that creators in all media have a social obligation to be responsible with their creations. And I think it is important because I think that moralities matters. Chapter 11. The title of this chapter is Where Games Should Go. And chapter 12. Title is Taking Their Rightful Place. These 2 chapters are somehow related to the future of games and their place. After chapter 12, we have an epilogue, and title of that is Fun Matters, Grandpa. It is somehow about importance of games and the importance of game design. And in my opinion, this is the last main part of the book. So it's almost end of this video, and I think this book can be recommended to people who are interested into video game development and game designing, and generally people who are interested in games. I think this is a good and useful book with lots of information. I hope you enjoyed this video and you like this video. If you have any comments or any question, please submit your question or share your opinion. And thanks a lot for watching this video.